right, guys, we're back, and in true form, under contract is literally all about the contracts we make with ourselves, and the most obvious way is in the real estate sense. But it goes a little bit further than that when we're talking here on the pod, when I'm interviewing the guests that we bring on. And it's either the contracts you make with yourself emotionally, spiritually, financially, personally, or all of the above. And now that we're back after the holidays, we have been on this trajectory of talking all things real estate and anything to do with the business, whether you're a real estate agent, an entrepreneur, if you are a buyer or a home seller and you're going through a divorce, you need to sell the property, if you're looking to buy a replacement home. So we're going to keep true with that track. And today I have a pretty cool guest and I'm excited to interview. I've been looking to interview a divorce attorney for quite some time because in the real estate world, as we all know, there are do's and don'ts for divorce. And we're going to talk a little bit about all of that today, especially when you're a couple and you're going through divorce, and each one of you have to find an attorney to represent you to go through this process. And you will ultimately, if it's court ordered, have to sell your home. You'll have to buy another home. So there's so many things that come into this equation as a real estate agent that I've experienced, and a lot of my business is divorce in orientation. So I thought that I'd bring on a specialist who will talk about it. She is an attorney here in town. She's one of the best. She comes highly recommended from one of my previous clients whose home that I sold recently. And we're going to talk all about the do's and don'ts for divorce, which I'm so excited about. So welcome, Jocelyn.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So I'm sure in the capacity and the role that you have chosen as your profession, you are probably asked a lot of questions. I'm sure if you're out to dinner, if you're out with friends, there's so many questions that are asked of you. And I'm always curious because, as a real estate agent, a lot of the transactions that I've facilitated and, whether it's representing the seller or the buyer, there's a lot of hoops that we have to jump through because, you're dealing with two attorneys, you're dealing with a judge sometimes and oftentimes court orders. And there are do's and don'ts that I don't think a lot of people take into consideration, right? Like, for example, you have to hire an experienced divorce attorney. Talk to me a little bit about the do's. What are some of the top 3 or 4 do's and why they're so important?
Sure. So when looking to hire a divorce attorney, there's something called a certified family law specialist in California, which I am as well. And so what that means is the state bar has designated these people as experts in the family law field. And so we've had to take an additional exam. You have to prove you've done a certain amount of trials in family law. And so, if you have a case where whether it be complex assets or maybe there's high spousal support potential orders or really maybe custody issues, we always tell people look to see if there's a certified family law specialist that you can work with because they are theoretically, supposed to be the best in their field because they've had to go through extended training. So when looking for a divorce attorney, I would say definitely look to see if you can find a certified family law specialist.
That helps, and that's very comforting. I think when you're going through something that's so emotionally trying and financially, there's so many
Absolutely.
different emotions that are going on when you're going through a divorce. The one thing that when I was looking over at some of the do's, I was thinking to myself, be transparent with your lawyer. Is that a thing?
It should, yes. I want everybody to be transparent with their lawyer. I will tell you, I've had situations where a client wasn't transparent and it almost always blows up in your face.
Yeah.
And by that, you don't want to be in a deposition and all of a sudden there's records that come to light that your client has done something terribly wrong and you had no idea what to do, because at least if you talk with your client ahead of time, you can prep for, okay, now how do we navigate this? How do we turn this into a situation that maybe we can overcome? But if you're just hearing about this for the first time in court or in a deposition, it's not the best place, obviously, to be learning stuff like this. So be as transparent as you can. And I will tell you, in the realm of family law, I do have a lot of clients that are embarrassed to talk about certain issues, and I've heard it all. And so I, encourage my clients, please tell me the truth, especially too with domestic violence.
Mm,
There's a lot that goes into there, and people feel, uncomfortable talking about different details. Maybe it be sexual abuse or physical abuse, but I really need to understand all of the details
mm,
to really bring that to light in court.
yeah.
So that's really important to be transparent. We're not going to judge you. We're here to represent you. So it
It's here
helps
to help.
you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's very similar in real estate, when they're going through the underwriting process to get their loan funded, at the 11th hour, something pops up.
Right.
And you're like, wait a minute, what do you mean you didn't disclose that you sold your property up in Sacramento?
Right.
I mean, it's like the 11th hour, and you're like, okay, this could have been avoided.
Right.
So I truly appreciate that, and I truly can understand that. So let's talk specifically in divorce related to real estate,
Sure.
right? Because it's one thing to have the do's and don'ts for divorce, period. Throw in, oh, we have to sell the house, right?
Right.
And and again, it goes back to how title is held, right?
Yes.
So given that title is held joint,
Mhm.
okay, tenancy, and inevitably one spouse, usually the spouse that's staying, the in spouse, not the out spouse, they may not want to sell the home,
Right.
right? So when you throw in a court order, how do you navigate through that? I know as a real estate agent how I've navigated it. I have to remain impartial, but as the attorney for, let's say, the end spouse, she's staying behind. How do you navigate that? I mean, obviously with court orders it's different, but how do you navigate that and manage that expectation?
So many times you're right. There is one spouse that doesn't want to sell the house, and the court will normally only order the home to be sold if there's not able to actually buy each other out. If
Mm,
there's one spouse that is like, look, I can afford to refinance and remove this person from the loan
mhm,
and I can afford the buyout, then the court will take that
mm,
and the order will be that that spouse gets that home. They have to refinance in a certain period of time
mm,
and, that's going to be their separate property.
mhm,
We have other situations
mhm,
where, with interest rates, people can't afford to refinance and the home has to be sold. It's so emotional because, especially if there's children, and when there's a court order that says this home has to be sold by this date, we give our clients normally 3 names for realtors. We get
mm,
them in contact.
mm.
We can pick one.
And one of them is me.
Yes.
Just a little plug.
Yes, and we get them in contact with
Right.
these, and both sides have to agree on the realtor.
Yes, they do.
So sometimes that's even a problem.
Yes,
And the
yep.
judge has to now make a decision. And the judge, they don't know the different realtors and they get frustrated. Why can't you just decide on one realtor? So we have to pick, 3 names. We let the other side pick one of the 3. And then, I'm working with my client and the realtor during this process. And
Mm,
so I always make sure opposing counsel's on the email
mhm,
and we're working with the realtor to just make sure we're all on the same page. And something that comes up a lot with real estate is there can be a lot of reimbursements owed to each other during
mm.
the divorce process. And a lot of times the home is the highest equity that you'll have in a
Yes,
divorce.
yes.
So when I'm working with a real estate agent, it's okay, my client is owed $100,000 from the proceeds. So I need to make sure you're aware of that.
Mm,
You have the court order that
mm,
says that so we can make sure escrow understands who's owed what.
right.
So it can get complex when there's credits and reimbursements owed. So I love to have everybody on the emails, everybody on the same page. And, to your point, I like to let my client know you're not representing just them. You're there to just sell this house. And so many people do try to get the realtor to side with them in this divorce, but that's obviously not your job and that can't be your job. So just keeping clients in check too about your role, I think can be really
That's
helpful.
so important because I recently had a situation where, one was trying to get me onto their side, right? And I had to put everybody on an email,
Right.
opposing counsel, everybody was on that email, and basically just have a come to Jesus with everybody and say, we need to understand that I'm not here to take sides. I'm impartial. My responsibility is to find a ready, willing, and able buyer, period.
Right.
End of story. And that's a difficult conversation when one thinks that, oh no, you should be on my side, and that, you should be on my side. And it's the continue of pitting one against the other, which is part of this whole process anyway.
Right.
So when it comes to the realtors, is it possible that one of the spouses can choose the realtor, or does it have to be somebody that's a third party that nobody knows?
One spouse can choose a realtor. So sometimes, especially if they're cordial, someone will say, oh, my friend is a realtor and my husband actually knows this
Mm,
person and feels comfortable. That's best case scenario.
right.
Everybody feels comfortable with this person. Maybe it's a family friend. That's not a problem. It's when normally high conflict cases, we just come up with 3 names that nobody really knows or have used before, so someone doesn't feel like, oh, they're picking their friend.
Mhm.
We give 3 names, and the other side will choose 1 name, and then we really just go from there.
Okay. So once they have settled on the realtor and the divorce proceedings continue, what are some of the don'ts that take place that you basically, say you probably don't want to violate that court order? You probably don't want to bring your kids to court. You don't want to talk over the judge. I mean, there's so many things that we look at and go, that's common sense,
Mhm.
but it happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
It happens. People violate court orders all the time, which let me tell you, as an attorney, when your client is violating a court order and the other attorney brings that to the judge's attention, you never want a judge to be angry at your client.
Mm.
And right off the bat, you're in a position where this judge is thinking you don't respect them.
Mhm.
And that is the worst place that you can be in. So if that court order says you better remove someone from a loan by
Mhm.
X date, you
Mhm.
better pay child support or spouse support by X date, you need to do that,
Mhm.
because you're setting yourself up to look really bad in front of a judge. And these divorces can take time. So maybe you're in court on one issue in 2023, and then it's not until the following year, but you're still actually litigating these issues. Once that judge gets an impression that you don't respect their court order, it's
Mm.
just going to be incredibly difficult to gain respect back from that judge. So always follow your court orders. That's huge. And
Yeah.
it's an easy way to just look good in front of the court, which is really half of the battle here.
You would think.
Yeah.
Yes. So so let's say that the agent's been selected, the divorce is going, it's a life of itself. Escrow is a different life of itself. All the roles that you have to fulfill to manage your client and the other side and the real estate. I mean, there's so many people that have to come together for this. You know, one of the things that I noticed in transactions that I've facilitated, coordinated that are divorce and divorce clients, that there's always one that's going to post on social media about
Mhm.
their experience or post about, anything that could be used against the other person, the out spouse or the in spouse, sending angry text messages or leaving voicemails. That can only muddy the water and the transaction because it's such an emotional time that we're all getting sucked into this. How do you manage that with someone who is already emotional about this experience? How do you manage that?
I tell my clients just stay off social media. In
Mm.
family law, almost all of our exhibits are text messages,
Mm.
are photographs. If it's a custody battle, we will post photographs of our client with the children, so we could use it in a positive way. But we've also likewise have used nasty text messages or text messages when parents are saying, I'm not available for the kids. I can't do this. I can't do that. I don't want my time this weekend. All of that will come to light in court, and it
Mhm.
just further can help my client in these situations. So if my client is the one that gets really angry, I always will say, let's calm down before we respond, right? Take a breather and then send that message.
Mm.
There's apps now that a lot of courts will order. One's called Our Family Wizard, for example, and that is supposed to, it kind of gives people a check. I'm in this app, and when I'm in this app, I need to be calm, I need to be cordial because the judge is
Mm.
likely going to read this.
Mm.
So a lot of times, if especially it's my client that I know maybe is a little more emotional or angry about a certain situation, I'll recommend, why don't we try one of these apps? And
Mm.
it's just kind of a constant check of, okay, when I'm on this app, I have to be on my best behavior
Yeah.
because this will and can be used, against me. And family court, you'll see text messages all over as exhibits. So just be really mindful. Photographs, text messages, all of that stuff.
That's a common practice that we have in real estate as well, that any text message, any email that you send as if it's going to end up in court
Right.
because is admissible.
Hmm.
It could very well be. It could be
Yes.
evidence. So let's talk a little bit about. I know in real estate when you have joint tenancy, they both have to agree to sell the house. We know that, but
Yes.
either party can put the home up for sale, but they both have to agree. They
Right.
both have to sign the paperwork to actually get it done. So tell me a little bit about who can file for divorce, who can consent, what consent is needed for divorce. Can one person file, and let's say the other person doesn't want to consent to it? How does that work?
So any party can file for divorce, any spouse. You don't need consent. So actually what could happen if I filed for divorce and my husband doesn't want the divorce
Mm.
and maybe they decide, I don't want this, I'm not going to respond. The court can actually move forward and make orders without even their participation
Mm.
after a certain period of time. So that's what can be really difficult, is when you have a client that really is just so heartbroken. They don't want this divorce. They don't want to acknowledge it. But if they don't participate in the case within 30 days of being served, served, the court can actually what's called a default judgment and can actually
Mm.
make orders without their participation. So unfortunately, I mean, if you're the one that doesn't want the divorce, it doesn't really matter. And you kind of, and I always tell my clients, in the nicest way possible, go to therapy. You have to really
Yeah.
work through this issue
Yeah.
because, many times there is one that wants a divorce and one that doesn't. And it's not a situation where the court's going to say, oh, this person doesn't want to get divorced, so we're going to put everything on hold. The
Yeah.
court wants to keep things moving and
Yeah.
keep the case going forward. And so you really have to kind of work through that emotional piece because
Yeah.
your case is going to
It's
go
gonna go.
on.
Yeah, it's gonna go on. Does it matter who files first?
No,
Okay.
it doesn't matter who files first. There's no advantage.
Mm.
But one thing to consider is once the divorce is initiated and the petition and the summons are filed,
Mhm.
when you serve the other side, there's something called automatic temporary restraining orders that go into
Mhm.
effect.
Mhm.
And those are really important for various reasons. They prevent both sides from canceling insurance policies,
Ah.
from changing beneficiaries, from wiping the bank accounts with all the money, and from taking a child out of the state of California.
Wow.
So while there's no advantage to filing, if I'm like, okay, I think my husband is going to just take my kid and go to Arizona,
Yeah.
I want to file right away and get him served
Yeah.
so that we can try to prevent that. And if that happens, there's serious consequences in the court for that.
Got it. Okay, so how does one start the divorce I mean, I've been through 2 of them, but it's been eons ago. So how does one start the divorce process?
So you have to fill out a petition. It's a form. And so there's forms that you have to fill out that
Did
just
I
get
really just rat on myself 2 divorces? I sure did.
So you fill out a form
Yeah.
that gets served with the court,
Yeah.
filed with the court, and then you serve the other side, and that essentially just opens up your divorce case in California. Other people will say, "Look, I don't even want to file yet. I want to go to mediation," and that
Mm.
could be a great option for you. And your mediator can start working with you even before you file for divorce.
Yeah.
So, but once you file, you open up that case with the court, and eventually you'll have to do that to get an actual judgment signed by the judge. But you can always start in mediation and not even initiate the filings yet.
So I mean, there's always been this buzz phrase in California, it's a 50-50 state, right? It's community property, right? So how are those assets and debts, how are they divided here in California?
So I like to tell people, think about it as like one large pot,
Yeah.
right? So from your date of marriage
Yep.
to your date of separation, basically date of separation is when you no longer are one, the community is broken, you've communicated you don't want to be in a relationship
Mhm.
anymore and your actions support that. So during that period of time, everything that you earn, everything you're acquiring goes into this pot that's subject to equal division.
Okay.
Unless it was inheritance, that's going to be your separate, or a gift to you, that's going to be your separate. But a lot of people think, oh, here's my income from the marriage, but I put it in a bank account in just my name, so that's just mine. And that's not true.
Mm.
And that's a hard moment that people have to realize, wait, all this money I've been stashing in my own account is actually community property
Right.
to which I owe the other person,
Right.
half of this.
Right. So in the real estate transaction, that becomes the community property, that the proceeds from the sale of the home, especially if there are debts that need to be paid
Yes.
that both parties have incurred during the marriage. Okay, I just wanted to make sure because the debts, how you assess the debts, because he could have had more, she could have had less, but it's 50-50.
It's 50-50 unless you can prove that some of those debts, a big one is if there's cheating, right?
Mm.
We can get into that because that's a big topic. But if there was affairs going on, that is misappropriation of community funds. And if you could prove, my husband racked up $50,000 in debt, but that was for his affair, that didn't benefit the community. So that wouldn't be fair for the community to split that, right? And so there's things that can be done, but that's a 50-50 California community property, 50-50. You split that debt so long as it benefited the community.
So let's talk about that. So what are some of the common reasons people are divorcing? I know we were talking a little bit about January is the month for divorces, right?
Yes.
And I know when COVID was a thing, we were all forced to stay inside with our significant other after realizing, oh my God, I've been married to this person for 30 years and I don't even like him or her,
Right.
right? So why January? Why is January? Is it because the holidays are over? I don't like my spouse. I spent one last holiday with them. Wah, wah, wah. Why January?
That's the holiday. People try to keep the peace and say, let me just get through this Christmas, this New Year. And then they actually call the first Monday of January the divorce Monday.
Wow.
And so that's when people generally run to the court and file.
That's insane.
I know. This is a very busy time.
Like from January on, or is it
Yeah,
just
so January, February are really big months too
yeah.
because February,
Get
we
out of
do
Valentine's Day. Don't have to get that
well,
Valentine's
Valentine's,
Day
but we
gift.
also do prenups, and so
Oh,
engagements are a really big one during the holiday and Valentine's Day.
what?
So people, so we have the divorce aspect of everyone saying I want out, right? And then we have the other side of it, which is our happy moments in family law, really, where people are getting married and they're excited, and so they're coming to talk to their attorneys on how can I protect my assets. I just got engaged, and all of that exciting stuff.
Okay, so what about like around Mother's Day? May. Is that a happy time for the court?
I mean,
It's like every month.
every month, but I
Yeah.
would say December is like a slow period just because, again, the holiday, people don't want to disturb the peace. The summers are normally slow.
Yeah.
Judges take times off,
Yeah.
but the divorce rate is so high that I wouldn't say
Oh,
there was really any month that's like, oh, there's nothing happening this month. It's going to be totally
what is the
quiet.
divorce rate?
It's 60% in
Whoa,
California,
whoa.
which is crazy because, I was actually watching a podcast and they talked about how the divorce rate is so high, yet people still obviously want to get married and still enjoy that. And even myself, I'm engaged. And so people are always like, how can you get engaged? No, knowing what you do, but
Yeah.
it doesn't, deter people.
It's
You still want to
The American
find,
dream is, we were created to be with one another. Some
yeah,
of us
so,
just haven't figured it out yet. And
right.
I'm clearly so tell me a little bit about the process. Do you need to go to court to get divorced? How, when children are involved, how is child custody determined? How does that work?
So it just depends on your particular case. If you are at odds with the other side, then almost, more than likely you will have to go to court and get court orders. But if you both decide, look, we don't want to spend a lot of money, we're really amicable, let's go through issue by issue and try to settle this, you absolutely can do that outside of court.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful option for some people. And then others, they just can't quite get it.
Yeah.
So I always say try starting. Let's see what we can do at settlement.
Mm.
And maybe we settle all issues but spousal support. So maybe that one issue has to be tried in court, but that will significantly minimize your fees if it's one issue versus, 10 different issues
Yeah.
in your case. Custody is determined on what is the best interest of the children. And so, everyone always, thinks that the court wants this 50-50 presumption, but that's not necessarily true. It's just what is the best interest of the kids? Maybe mom works 80 hours a week. And so maybe mom does want 50-50, but it's actually not even possible because when the kids are with mom, they're in daycare or with a nanny. And so the court has to look at big picture, just what is in the best interest of these kids. And that changes for every single family.
Right. And that's determined when? Is that out the gate or?
It depends. So
Okay.
some people, California is so expensive that a lot of people, even though they initiate divorce, they still have to live in the same home because they can't afford to buy another home or rent.
Yep.
So when that happens, there's not really custody orders in place because you both are still living together, navigating this. Once someone moves out, that's generally when we see either formal orders or informal orders actually happening because now we have two separate households and we have to figure out what's going on with these kids. If you can figure it out with your spouse, great. If you can't, some people can, some people can't.
Yeah.
And if you can't, that's when, you have to file a motion in family court to actually be heard. And the courts are so behind. They were behind pre-COVID, but since COVID, it's even worse. And so you can file for a motion asking for child custody orders and you might not get heard for 3-4 months. That period of time when there's no structure, no order can be incredibly difficult for parents to navigate.
And those do's and don'ts take place, I think, during that cooling off period where we filed in November, but our hearing isn't until May. Right. So a lot can happen between November and May.
And that brings me, I think about that. So we have a lot of people who, maybe the dynamic was there's a breadwinner and the other person was a stay-at-home mom. And so divorce can be really scary for that person in that situation because what do I do if, they cut the credit cards off before, someone files and I don't have access to money. And so, for someone that's not working, we can call it divorce planning or really just kind of getting your ducks in a row. But I always say, look at what are your expenses for like the next 3-4 months and try to have that, reserved to the side because you're not likely going to get heard in court for 3 or 4 months. And so if you file your motion and the other side is served, they're not just going to voluntarily start maybe paying your credit card bill like they always were. They may be angry. Now, that's not a good look in front of this judge if you cut off the other side, but
Right.
people do it all the time. And then you have someone who's just struggling, racking up credit card debt until they can be heard in court.
Yeah, and that's probably more common than not.
Oh, it's
Right,
absolutely
and
very
that can go
common.
that and it's not gender specific.
Yeah,
I could go either way.
absolutely.
So talk a little bit about I mean, I'm always curious about, because I hear it, as a real estate agent, I hear not because I've asked, but they just share the reason why the divorce is going on.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about what happens if the spouse cheats, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter which one it is. That has a massive impact, not on the judge ruling, however, it's not a good look,
It's not a
right?
good look, but California is what we call a no-fault state.
Mm,
So it really can't be brought up in these proceedings. Judges get frustrated if you do. So many clients want that to be
mm,
put in
mm,
declarations. They want their story told, but the judge's position, which makes sense, is look, this is a no-fault state. It doesn't matter. Obviously, it can be more difficult for someone that was cheated on maybe to navigate through the divorce,
yeah,
and that's where, the attorney and the therapist have to really get in and try to work through that. But how cheating is relevant is we talk about misappropriation, and
mm,
we talk about could you imagine, your husband is spending all of this money on a mistress, or your wife is spending all this money on someone else? And that's where it can be relevant if you can actually go back and prove that these hotel stays, they were with this other woman,
mm,
or these dinners, they're with, her
man,
boyfriend or
yeah.
whatever it may be. And so that's where it can get really relevant. But it's really difficult, I think, for a lot of people that have been in a situation where they were cheated on to realize I actually can't tell the judge that story, which is such a big part of this divorce, but the court really won't hear it,
Right.
which, is kind of a difficult thing for people to really kind of
And it's hard
grasp.
because it's emotional to begin with, right? And then
Absolutely.
you're uncovering all of these layers of, "Oh, we just found out we just saw the credit card statement and the wife doesn't know." Like, "Oh my
Right.
gosh, now he's cheating with somebody," all these things are coming out that could cause knee-jerk reactions to affect the whole process. Um, what's the process like in hiring a divorce attorney?
So for hiring a divorce attorney, you can look around, ask people who they know, who they recommend. You can go on Google. But once you start calling law firms, you should be able to get a consultation set up. It's so important that I think you meet in person with that attorney. Make sure that it's a good fit. Family law is so personal.
Mhm,
It's
mhm,
not this just transactional type of
mhm,
law where it doesn't
mhm.
really matter. So you have this consultation, you meet with that lawyer, some great questions to ask, or, what's their hourly rate?
Yeah.
Sharing what your goals are to get out of this,
Mm,
because some people maybe have significant money they want to spend on it,
right.
which most people don't. Most people are like, even if you have money, they don't want to be throwing it at
No,
lawyers
no.
for a divorce. But
Especially
meeting
when
with
the real estate's involved because 'cause you're losing all that money, giving the other half to the
absolutely.
other person,
So
yeah.
just making sure that, you and this attorney, it makes sense, you feel comfortable with them, that's huge in family law. And then from there, they'll likely quote you a retainer, you sign an engagement agreement, they represent you moving forward, which for some people is obviously, so important because they don't want to deal with the other side, maybe
Mhm,
the person that cheated on them or the
mhm,
person that they feel wronged by. And the attorney can step in and just have all the direct communication, either with that opposing party if
mhm.
they're not represented, or their attorney, and that can really minimize a lot of stress for the actual client so they don't have to deal with the day-to-day of this divorce.
So when you're representing a client and they're going through the divorce and you've got this one of the spouse that's cheated, you've got children involved, and we gotta sell the house. What are some tips that you would give anyone out there that's embarking upon divorce? And there are assets involved, and there are debts that need to be paid by the proceeds of the home. What are some tips that you could give them before even coming and calling you? Like, what needs to be done? What needs to be ready before making that call?
I would say what needs to be ready is you understanding your finances. So, especially if you were what we call the out spouse, so the person that wasn't in the know at the finances, gather those tax returns. Sometimes, once the divorce starts processes, then maybe the person that is the in spouse, they actually take those records and we have to
Mm,
go through, hoops to get them. So, get copies of the tax returns, get copies of the pay stubs, know your expenses so that you can put money aside in case you are in a situation where you are cut off financially.
mhm.
If your children are old enough, and obviously, you can talk to therapists about this, but having honest conversations with them just about the family actually splitting up and
Yeah,
how, the priority is going to be focusing on the children, getting them into therapy if that's something you think is appropriate for them given their age.
yeah.
And, if things are cordial with the other side or you want to keep them that way, a lot of times I tell clients, why don't you talk to the other side about, look, I think I'm going to file for divorce. These are the steps. I have to have you served. Can we arrange for that? Versus a process server at your door knocking
I
at
know.
7 o'clock at night, and
Yeah.
now wife is just served with a petition,
Yeah.
and she's enraged because
Yeah.
she's blindsided by
Yeah.
it. So I find in my experience, unless of course there's domestic violence or a safety issue, that when you have honest conversations about, I'm unhappy, this is what I'm thinking, can we talk about this? It's not, so shocking,
Yeah.
and they can actually work together in a more amicable way.
So what about when the house is something that, what if it's clear and apparent that the house needs to be sold, right?
If it's clear and apparent that the house needs to be sold, then you can come up with a stipulation that
Okay.
outlines that.
Right.
It can say we're going to contact a realtor by X date. We're going to sell the home by X date. One big thing with homes being sold is the furniture in family law.
Yes.
It's a huge thing
Yes.
because some people will fight over a teapot to fight over the teapot, and
Yeah.
they want to get you involved, and
Yes.
it's not your place.
I've been there, yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
so
I want that couch. I want the Peloton. I want
Yeah.
this. Well, hold on a second. Whose is it?
Exactly.
Right. And then the attorneys have to get involved because I can't make that decision.
Absolutely.
Because by default in real estate, when an offer is made and they want some items to convey, I can't just say, okay, sure, put it in the offer. It's negotiable. No, it isn't.
Right.
No,
And
it
so
isn't.
if you bought that furniture during the marriage, it's community property.
Right.
So if someone wants $10,000 worth of furniture, technically they're supposed to pay the other side $5,000 of that. So if we know the home is a big issue, it has to be sold. I always say, okay, let's come up with a list of the furniture, furnishings, appliances. What do you want? And let's work with opposing counsel,
Yep.
because the last thing we want is this home is closing and there's furniture in this house and people can't decide what goes where. So
Right.
that's a big thing and judges hate dealing with furniture. They
minutia.
find it so
Yeah.
petty.
Yeah.
And it's like, you guys can't agree on who's going to get the couch.
Yeah.
And some people just can't.
Yeah.
But-
No, I've been there. Yes, I've seen that and firsthand where the wife at the 11th hour, right before we're closing, I want the Peloton. No, I want the Peloton.
Yeah.
And then the husband shows up and says, I got a moving crew here taking my stuff. Then the opposing counsels, it becomes
It can be
a
chaos.
soap opera. Yes,
Absolutely.
it
So that's
becomes a
something-
Netflix series.
And a lot of
Yes.
people like to wait at the end. They think furniture, it's not a big deal. We'll just wait towards the end of the divorce. But actually, sometimes that can take the longest,
Yep.
just because there's so many items. And some things are sentimental to some people, and some people just like the fight.
Yeah.
So if they know the Peloton means a lot to wife, they're going to fight for that, even though, do they even really need the Peloton?
And the dog.
Oh, the dog.
The dog is a big one.
A big one that we see in California,
Yeah.
especially, I feel like with millennials, maybe it's a less child custody issue right now,
Yeah.
and more so about this dog.
Yeah.
And the courts are moving away from just treating dogs as property, which is what they used to do. And now it's more of a best interest analysis of, what's best for this animal.
Yeah.
One thing we see that's common is if there's a custody schedule and, dad has the kids Monday, Tuesday, the dog will travel with the kids to dad's Monday, Tuesday.
Wow.
So the dog will stay with the kids and kind of go between the households, because pets become like
Family.
family.
They
not your
are.
kids.
They're my children.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. So when preparing the home for sale, let's say that they are selling it, and then let's say the wife doesn't want to sell it, but the judge clearly says no, we need to sell it because we need to get rid of some of this debt over here. What would you say some tips are for both? I mean, whether you represent the in or out spouse, what are some tips in order to make sure that, because there's so many things on the table that need to be addressed when going through a divorce and preparing for it, and throw the house sale into it. What are some things that you would suggest or advise just to make that a little easier?
So if the house has to be sold and we know that, and we're going to stipulate to that being sold, it's not really just the house. Is the realtor recommending improvements? Is the realtor recommending painting even? That can be expensive. Who's paying for that? Maybe someone has money and the other person doesn't. So maybe the stipulation says wife is going to cover the cost of the exterior paint, and the other side will be reimbursed once the home is sold.
Right.
So there's so much to think about. And that's when we do, once a realtor is selected, to talk about that.
Yes.
What do you see being additional costs? Because we want to put that in our stipulation so that doesn't prevent you from selling the house as quickly as need be. And the longer that home sits on the market, that's not a good situation. But if you're fighting over who's going to replace the carpet and pay for that, that could be a 6-month fight that really doesn't benefit anybody. So really just getting all of those terms into a stipulation, because you have to abide by that. If you don't, you can go back to court. The court can sanction you, which is monetary fines. There's enforcement things that can be done. So just making a stipulation as detailed as possible, so all of those things are covered, including, by X date, the furniture, is going to be removed pursuant to the parties' list of who's getting what.
Right.
Just so there's no open-ended pieces as you're trying to, get everything over the finish line.
Right, and they have to agree. The challenge that I've run into when it comes to, selling a divorce listing is, when the offers come in,
Mm,
getting both parties to agree on a really good offer,
right.
right? And the wife may not want to accept it because she's so attached to the home,
Right.
right? So you're dealing with that emotion. Or, you know what? I'm just going to delay this. It's a delay tactic. Let me just not accept it. Let's just keep this whole thing going. And again, that's where, as the real estate agent, you have to really say, okay, listen, I'm here to bring you a ready, willing, and able buyer. And I've done that.
Mhm.
So then you as counsel has to step in and say, "Hold on a second. The stipulation reads,
Right.
and you have to abide by that."
Right. And we can put language in there, as far as the price that you agree to is going to be something also recommended
Yeah.
by the realtor.
Yeah.
If it's so obvious that you're just delaying, the other side can bring a motion and ask, to get in quicker for the court to hear this. And if the court hears that there is a willing, able buyer with
Mm,
great terms,
mm,
great
mm.
offer, and you're just delaying, that is not going to be a good look. Again, the court can sanction you and there's things that can happen. So I understand the process of selling a house is so emotional,
Mhm.
but you really have to come to terms with that. If the court's already ordered it to be sold, then you have to just work together there.
And is that stipulation referred to as an ex parte?
So an ex parte is when you go in for emergency orders. So
Okay.
generally that's reserved for like custody orders or
Okay.
procedural stuff. But if a home is supposed to be sold, let's say, and for some reason someone's not signing something
Mm,
and there's really quick deadlines for
mm.
escrow and stuff like that, then I would say, you can at least try to go in ex parte and tell the court, hey, if we don't get this signature by husband, this home is actually
Yeah.
going to fall out of escrow
Yeah.
and there's going to be a problem
Intentional
here.
delays. Yeah,
Right.
intentionally interfering is what we call it in real estate. Yeah,
All right.
interfering with the successful sale of the home. So from start to finish, how long does a divorce take?
It depends on the case. I will say there is what we call a cooling off period in
Mhm.
California, which is 6 months. So the idea behind that is the court wants to make sure you're sure that you don't want to be with this person anymore.
Mm. God, it's so psychological.
As family law attorneys, we can't promote divorce. So if I have someone meeting
What?
with me that says we're going to try couples therapy, wonderful. Go to couples therapy. We're here if and when you ever need us. Some people never, need us again and they work on their marriage and that's wonderful. And other people try one session and they're like, I'm done, I'm out. But that cooling off period is really designed to just, have people think, is this what I really want? And they're not making a rash decision just because they had a big fight.
Yeah.
So some people can actually settle their case in like 2 months and they'll have everything, we'll have everything done up, a judgment, everything ready to go. We can get that filed with the court, but the court won't file it and call you a divorced person until that 6-month waiting period starts
Oh
or
man, that's
ends. Yeah.
brutal.
So you can actually be done and settle everything, but I guess for purposes of like if you wanted to remarry, you wouldn't be able to do that until the court actually considers you a divorced person, which would be
So
that
how does
6
that
months.
factor in when you've got an annulment? I mean, because that's such a quick timeline, right? And I mean, how can you possibly do everything that you just talked about in a quick annulment situation?
Yeah, I mean, you can. You can still, with an annulment, there's specific grounds of when you can get an annulment, but the statutory period is the same. And
Mm.
so you can get that done, but you're not going to be considered a divorced person for that 6 month
That is so
waiting period. And something
emotional.
to consider, that happens and people don't think about this is once you're considered a divorced person, you have to get your own insurance. Your spouse can no
Mm,
longer cover you. Even if
mm.
you try to agree to that, that's not an enforceable order. So once you actually have a signed divorce judgment, you have to figure out, okay, I'm no longer, normally there's like a grace period there,
Right.
but then it's like, okay, I have to figure out, do I have an employer? Can I get insured through that employer? Do I have to get independent health insurance, which can be astronomical? So one thing to consider when you're going through a divorce, once the court actually says you're a divorced person, you have to get your own health insurance.
Mm,
And so with that being said, there's a grace period of time, so you're not going to be kicked off normally right away.
mm,
But if I'm receiving spousal support, right, I'm the lower income spouse,
mhm,
and I want my attorney to think about that because that's an additional cost
mm.
that I may not be having right now because I'm still married. But as soon as my judgment is finalized, my insurance may be $700 a month. And I
Yeah.
want, that to be accounted for when I'm actually arguing what my needs are for support moving forward.
Yeah.
So things like that maybe aren't present right now as you're going
Yeah.
through the divorce, but will be once you're actually a divorced person.
So the $1,000,000 question is, because you have such knowledge on this, you've been doing this for what, 8 years?
8 years.
Yeah. You're from the East Coast originally, and you've been here in San Diego. What made you choose this as your career?
I love psychology, and when I
Mm,
was in undergrad, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist,
mm,
and then I knew I always loved law, and I thought about it more, and I was like, what area could I go in law where I can kind of combine, the psychology aspect of it and the legal part of it. And
Yeah.
so in law school, I took a lot of family law courses, and I loved it. I love helping people, and there's a lot of burnout in family law, but it is really gratifying, especially, we do a lot of domestic
Oh,
violence,
yeah.
and just helping people get out of a bad situation, or helping people, close a chapter that they want to close.
Yeah.
It is really gratifying, and I love working with clients one-on-one,
Yeah.
so I do really enjoy it.
And I'm sure, every case is so different, right? You tend to be, and it's the same in real estate. We lack emotion because we can't become attached to the outcome
Mhm.
in real estate. We have to keep reinforcing that if that deal didn't happen, next, move on,
Right.
right? So, I mean, are there days where it's hard because you love helping people, and it's
Right.
hard because the outcome isn't always what you hope for.
Right.
I mean, how do you leave at the end of the day and go, "Oh, man," you know?
It's hard.
Yeah,
I mean, as the years go on that I've been doing this, it becomes easier,
yeah,
but I'm not gonna say I perfected it. I mean, there's still certain cases like you think about from 5 years ago,
yeah,
whether it be custody or domestic violence, that kind of just stick with you forever. But, I try to have a healthy balance. I try to, work out and do healthy things to kinda get my mind off of work when I'm not at the office, and really try to just leave it at work. But it's so much easier said than done, and that's,
yeah,
I think, something all family law attorneys will probably struggle with
yeah,
really forever.
yeah. What do you love about what you do?
I love working with the clients.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and helping.
And
It's a
helping.
different level of assistance. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
kinda like that in real estate. It's a big decision they're making. Getting a divorce is a big decision, right? So
Absolutely.
it's paramount, right? You just have to really look at that.
And we have people that meet that are just like, "Can I even afford to get divorced?" It can be expensive. If
Yeah,
we're talking about you, or having to pay someone's spousal support, some people are like, "I'm not happy in my marriage,
yeah.
but it's gonna cost me X amount to pay this person's support. I'd rather just stay in this
Mm,
situation than
mm.
go forward because this is the financial result." And so, that's something that people deal with a lot, of the financial aspect of it, which, can be a lot.
If you were to guess how many divorces just if you were to guess off the top of your head in January.
How many divorces am I working on, or
Yeah,
how many have I have
have you in January, just when January rolls around,
Um, I would say new cases, probably we get anywhere from like 10 to 15 in
jeez,
January. Yeah.
in addition to your
In
caseload.
addition to our caseload. Yeah.
So give me one do and one don't.
Okay. I would say do go to therapy, work with a licensed therapist as you're going through this process. One thing that people do is they love to vent to their family law attorney.
Mm,
And while
and
I
their
want
agent, yes.
and while I want to help,
Yeah,
I'm not qualified
yeah,
to give that type of, therapeutic response to people. And also something to consider, family law attorneys likely have a higher hourly rate than your therapist. So
mm,
you're spending so much money venting about your situation to your lawyer when really they're not qualified to give you, advice on that. So get into therapy, because it's going to make your divorce process with your lawyer so much better when
yeah.
you can work through that trauma.
What's the don't?
I would say the don't is, do not fail on purpose to disclose assets and debts. People think, they're going to hide an asset and everything's going to be great, and they're going to get to keep this house that they had somewhere that no one knew about. But what happens is, if we ever do find out about that asset, the court can award that entire asset to the other side
Yeah,
for failure to disclose.
yeah,
And that happens more than you might think.
yeah.
But
It's a big thing. Yeah,
people think, "Oh, I'm going to be, sneaky and not disclose
no,
this one bank account, let's say."
yeah.
And there's ways for us to discover that. And if the court finds out that you did that, that
It's not a
potential
good
whole
look.
asset can go to the other side. So is it worth it?
Yeah.
No.
Failure to disclose is a big just period
Right.
in life. I mean,
Right.
and then when you get with the law, whether it's in real estate or in family law, it's the ramifications are great.
Absolutely.
Um, Before I let you go, what's your word for the year?
My word for the year.
I threw off my first guest with that question because we were on a roll, and we are on a roll. What's your word for the year?
Okay, I have to think.
Given what you do for work, given that you're newly engaged, What's your word for the year?
I think it's new beginnings. I
Mm.
think that, I'm at Bremer White Brown and O'Mara, and we started the San Diego Department for Family Law recently.
Mm.
And so this year, I'm really determined to market and network
Mm.
and really try to grow that and, brand recognition. Also, in my personal life, I'm engaged. And so I'm going through that whole process, which is really exciting. So I think in both work, I'm at this firm and we're expanding. And then in my personal life, I'm going through the engagement process.
Yeah.
So something new, something exciting that's happening in both aspects of my
I
life.
love that. New beginnings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone wants to, whoever's listening or watching, how can they get a hold of you?
They can send me an email at jrusso, Russo, at Bremer, BREMERWHYTE.com.
Okay. Bremer White.
Bremer White.
Okay.
I also have an Instagram where I post family law educational tips, which is family law_simplified.
Wonderful. And of course, if you need to get in touch with her, you can reach out to me and I can get you connected with her. Oh, I love all of this. I mean, that there's so many things in life that we are aware of that we fail to give the utmost importance to, and this is so important because it's happening every day, every second of the day. And when you throw in real estate and you throw in the divorce, real estate in and of itself is already a very challenging transaction. And then you have divorce, which there's so many connotations to that. People can perceive that as being, oh my God. No, it's happening.
Right.
Any life transition is happening, whether you're going through a divorce, renting to owning, you're downsizing. It's a life transition, and this is
Absolutely.
one of the number one life transitions in the real estate world. So I'm grateful for you for coming on and just kind of giving us the cliff notes of the do's and the don'ts and the questions to ask and for divorce, and especially when it relates to the real estate side of it because it happens. It's a very
Mhm.
big component to the business, and I didn't realize January and February were the months for it, so I'll have to start paying attention to that a little bit more. But then it trickles down into spring flings,
Right.
right? And things get lighter and bloom, and then it's fun again and whatnot. But you guys, it's very, very real. If you know someone who's going through divorce, or if you know someone who is getting ready to, needs an attorney, reach out to me, reach out to Jocelyn. Very simple do's and don'ts that we can all kind of plug into our life. Be transparent,
Right.
right? Get your finances in order. I mean, go to therapy if you've got things you need to kind of reconcile in your own mind, and be mindful of who you are, your place in life, so that when and if divorce presents itself, you're ready to go and you can pull the trigger with 100% certainty, knowing that you're preparing it the right way. So thank you for being on here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate you. And
Thank you.
guys, if you have any questions, like I said, reach out to me. And as always, San Diego, we appreciate you. Peace out.